This is Crenshaw, Briggs, and VT. We want the touchdown, we not trying to go for 3. And it's best if you get up out the street, cause them bulls out the pen and they bout to stampede.
Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to a new segment. We're calling this The Fourth Quarter. Today we have Deepi Sidhu, who is a senior content producer for the Houston Texans. She's been with the Texans since 2013, and you've seen her on TV, listened to her on the radio, as well as her podcast, Deep Slant, and read her work on thehoustonTexans.com. Deep, why don't you just say hi to everyone that's listening? And if I missed anything, let us know what else that you do with the Texans, because it seems like you do pretty much everything.
I think you covered most of it. But thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited that I get to be your first fourth quarter guest. So yeah, I mean, this will be my 11th season covering the Texans, and it's exciting every single season. But I have to say this season feels a little bit more exciting than the last few years. So a lot of fan buzz around the city. I think, starting with DeMeco Ryans being named head coach, and then of course drafting both CJ Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. There's a lot of players that we're watching here in camp. Tank Dell. I think the buzz around camp is certainly exciting, and there's a lot of hope around the team, as they're sort of building towards a new era under DeMeco Ryans. So I'm thrilled to be covering the team for my 11th season, and hoping for better results this year and the years beyond.
Well, speaking to that, so let me ask my first question, since you brought up better results. So right now, the defense has been really winning in camp. And I think Coach Slow and CJ are really eager to get the offense to win at least once or twice out there real soon. I'm curious, because you've been out there every day, what offensive player outside of CJ Stroud do you think could set them over the edge to go back on Thursday and actually whoop some defense butt?
That's a great question. I mean, you want a new player? Because, of course, you've got, Dameon Pierce. I think that, he is just outstanding. We saw what he did his rookie year. That's not changed this year. I think offensively, you want some young guys. I'm super excited about Xavier Hutchinson. I think you've probably heard his name throughout camp. I feel like every day he makes some tremendous catch, and it's always from a different quarterback. I've seen him make catches from Case Keenum, from CJ Stroud, from Davis Mills. He seems, just consistent in camp, and I think he's been a really pleasant surprise. I think all eyes have been on Tank Dell, of course. But, I don't know. I think some of these young receivers might be the ones to really put the Texans over the edge, because it was a position of concern. You lose Brandon Cooks this offseason, and you sign Robert Woods. But other than Nico Collins, you've got kind of a young group in there. So, under Robert Woods being the veteran and Collins now heading into his third season, you're sort of looking for, how that receivers group may shake out. And so I think the young receivers are really going to be ones to watch. I think if they can sort of establish that chemistry with the quarterbacks here, that's just something that it's been a little bit slower. And DeMeco Ryans, he doesn't really like to do a lot of 7-on-7 work. He likes to do team. We see a lot of team action, because he feels like, well, that's how the quarterback really starts to see the pressure and how the pocket is sort of collapsing around him. So I think he wants him to get a feel for that. He's obviously a defensive-minded coach. But I think the flip side of that is, maybe you don't get to work on the timing and chemistry as much as you would get to in 7-on-7. So, I think that'll all come. It's taking some time, and I know they're all sort of working together before and after practice to make that happen. But, I think that the offense is really looking to start clicking soon. The other day in practice, it was the first time we saw a 2-minute drill. And I thought that was the first time I thought, yeah, CJ Stroud, he looks, I can see where this is headed in 2-minute drill. He seemed a little bit more comfortable, and maybe it's because there's an end goal in sight, right? Like, you're driving down the field, you got a minute 15 or a minute 30 left on the clock. Like, let's see what you can do. So I felt like he moved the ball pretty well in 2 minutes. And so you see a few steps forward, a few steps back every single day. It's sort of, you got to read the forest through the trees. But I'm hoping that some of these young receivers can really step up for these quarterbacks in camp soon.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he got us in field goal range, right?
Yeah. He marched down the field, and neither quarterback had a touchdown, but you definitely saw some progress with the scheme. So I think the first day of camp was really rough for the offense, and the next day was a little bit better. It's also, I don't know if it's the heat. I don't know if it's just a new scheme. and everyone's trying to get used to it, but it's just a lot of adjusting that they have to do in camp. So I thought the 2-minute drill was a little bit more telling than what we've seen in team drills. They sort of run together. Everybody gets, a couple of plays, and then the next quarterback gets rotated in. But it was nice to see each one get sort of a chance to drive down the field and see what they could do.
Okay. Well, Crenshaw, why don't you ask your first question?
I want to know from your perspective, who has the quarterback edge right now, the CJ and Davis Mills?
Right now you have to give it to Davis. I feel like it's his third season, so he's maybe a little bit ahead. I wouldn't say he's just like leaps and bounds ahead of CJ Stroud. I think Case looks the most comfortable. Case Keenum, he's just like throwing it up there. He's definitely got a command of the offense. The only downside to him is, he's not got really the starters with him when he's taken over. He's got a lot of the sort of the younger receivers, but we've seen some of those first and second team receivers sort of rotate in and out with Case as well. But I think it just goes to show you that experience has really been the leading, I think, edge for these quarterbacks in camp. And of course, Case has got the edge there. And then Davis Mills, I mean, he's got a couple of seasons under his belt. He's started in the NFL, even though it's a new offensive scheme. He has a little bit better grasp of what the defense is showing him. And CJ, it's going to take him a little bit of time. He's still adjusting to the speed of the NFL, life in the NFL, chemistry with his receivers. But right now, I think Davis is ahead by a little bit, as might be expected because he's been the starter and he's started some games. I'm looking to see if one of them really separates himself, though, in the next few weeks, especially when preseason starts and we get these joint practices underway.
Okay. So one of the things that I am really interested about is you witnessed both the Lovie Smith era and how he ran his practices. We've heard some things from Aaron Wilson and other reporters on how Lovie Smith ran his practices. And now you've seen DeMeco Ryans. And I want to know if you could tell us some of the key differences that you see with DeMeco Ryans, the way he runs his practices and the way Lovie Smith ran his.
I think I mentioned it earlier. We see a lot more 11-on-11 work, like a lot more. There's always 4 team periods. I think with the exception of day 1, they only had 3 team periods. It was a little bit of a shorter practice. They were sort of acclimating to training camp and the heat. But every day we see 4 full team periods. We don't see any 7-on-7. I think that DeMeco runs it the way he likes to run it. I don't know if that's how they ran it in San Francisco or if that's just the way he's always wanted to run it. But, he's younger. There's a lot of teaching that takes place on the field, a lot of install, a lot of, him sort of working with the linebackers on the sideline and talking with them in between, in between plays and reps. I think the other thing I've really noticed is there's a lot of communication between the offense and the defense. You see a lot of the defensive backs talking to the wide receivers, or, CJ Stroud and the quarterbacks talking to the DBs, or, the wide receivers talking to somebody on the defense. There's just a lot of chatter of what are you seeing? Where can I adjust? How do you defend me when I do this? How can I defend you when you do that? I think that's really telling. I've heard multiple guys talk about how they've had conversations with the opposing side after a play or after practice to sort of work through, what they can do and what they're seeing and how they can improve the game a little bit better for themselves.
Okay. Crenshaw, why don't you go ahead and ask your second question?
Okay. This is about Kenyon Green. He's coming back from injury. From what you've seen so far, how has he looked? And I'm gonna go back to the heat. You spoke about the heat. Is the heat really a factor out there? Because that's been a little buzz around the camp with CJ's, past couple of days.
I think it's hard to say. I find it hard to imagine the heat wouldn't be a factor. They're out there I'm just standing out there and it's hard to stand out there. But I think offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick talked about it a little bit. I mean, it's so hot. Everyone's, there's a lot of humidity. There's, the ball's like a little bit more wet. You can't, I don't think that's an excuse for how the offense has been playing or performing. Obviously everybody has to deal with the heat and humidity. So I think it is a bit of a factor. I think, they're well hydrated. I haven't seen anybody have to leave on, with dehydration or anything like that, which I think is really great because they take a lot of breaks, nice long breaks. We've got like an ice box we call it the ice box, but it's basically a big refrigerator for the players to pile into in between. They give everybody sort of a go around in there to cool their body temperature. So I think there's a lot of things in place to sort of combat the heat. This is not, it isn't usually hot, but it's hot every year in Houston. So maybe CJ is adjusting to it. I'm not really going to comment on, what he thinks, but I think as it goes, it might get a little bit better for him. The good thing is you don't have to play in the sort of heat once the season starts. So,
Right.
that's the bonus. What was the second part of your question? You asked about the heat.
The second part, how's Kenyon Green look to you?
Oh, Kenyon Green. Yes. Kenyon Green. So, I wrote a story about Kenyon just before the start of camp. He talked with Texans radio. He was dealing with injury last year, and then we didn't really see him in OTAs. He was, dealing with working his way back from injury. So, a lot of people were just sort of waiting with bated breath to see Kenyon Green come back, because even last offseason, his rookie season, he missed a lot of the offseason because of injury. And then when he finally did play in camp, he suffered a concussion, which
Right.
kept him out a couple of weeks. So it was slow going for Kenyon Green. And, we certainly saw flashes of some good, some bad during his rookie year. You could sort of see where he could be a really talented player. He obviously earned the starting role very early on at left guard. So you bring him in here in year 2. And, I was pleasantly surprised that when he was back at practice, he was doing everything, with the first team. They weren't holding him back. He was pretty much a full go. He's been out there doing everything, and, he has looked solid, next to, the O-line. And when we've seen the O-line has really become, I guess, a strength of the team, where it's something that they've really had to struggle with the past like 5 or 6 years, with now that they signed Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard, and they bring in Shaq Mason. So, I think Kenyon Green's in good hands. He's got a lot of vets on that O-line, and they've developed a chemistry. So he's got some games under his belt working alongside the vets. And then you sort of see him building on that this year. So I think the games will be more telling, but I've been pleasantly surprised with Kenyon Green's return. He does look like he's healthy. He said he was healthy. He couldn't wait to get out there and show what he was able to do. And so far, I really haven't seen anything to the contrary. He does look like he's fully healthy and ready to go here for year 2.
Awesome. I love that question. I actually love that answer more, because without Kenyon Green and Scruggs doing their job, that O-line's going to have a tough time. So if Kenyon Green and Scruggs can both really do their job, then I know that CJ Stroud's going to have a decent year.
Well, and I don't even know if it's Scruggs right now, because Scott Quessenberry is certainly still very much in that mix for starting center. I mean, we see him getting a lot of the first team reps. I think for Juice, I know everybody wants Juice to get in there and start because A, his name is Juice, and B, you
Right.
draft a center. But, I think it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for him, sort of getting that communication and, getting in sync with the rest of the O-line, whereas Scott Quessenberry has worked with the O-line before. So I think we may see that change in camp, but for now, it still very much seems like that's Scott Quessenberry's role.
Okay. All right. Those that know me from Twitter and watch the podcast regularly know that me and Scott Quessenberry have a little bit of a back and forth because of his performance last year. So I really do hope Scruggs takes that position, because not only did we use a high draft pick on him, but I'm really hoping that we can keep that O-line real strong, because I think that one of the things that rookies have an issue with, particularly coming out of college, is needing that line to be strong. We know that at Ohio State, he basically dropped his completion percentage from 70% to 40% under pressure. And Scott Quessenberry was ranked, unfortunately, one of the lowest linemen in the league last year. So I was really hoping that Scruggs can come up there and be amazing along with Kenyon Green, because I think the other 3 linemen are basically, should be Pro Bowl status. So that's my only concern about Juice Scruggs.
Well, I think, yeah, I hear what you're saying. My only disagreement with you is really last year, Justin Britt was supposed to be the starting center. And after week 1, we didn't see him again for the rest of the year. And Scott Quessenberry was sort of thrust into that role. It was really, no one really thought that Scott Quessenberry was going to start every single game at center for the entire year. So he sort of had to go through a learning curve, very much so, on that O-line. So, I think he was kind of put in a really tough position, and it was an easy season. And, you still dealt with, injuries along that O-line. We talked about Kenyon Green. So I don't really know what's going to happen. I think the center battle is probably one of the biggest questions here that we had heading into camp. Like, who is going to emerge out of camp as the starting center? Because it was a question last year and this entire offseason. So it will be a great battle to watch. That's for sure.
Well, we're coming up on that 2-minute warning. So the last question I've got to ask you here is, I heard on Drew's podcast that Garbage was one of your first mainstream concerts that you went to in the 90s. Mine was Offspring.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know if you could have seen a band from the 80s as one of your first concerts, what band would that have been?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think I would have loved to have seen Michael Jackson or Madonna. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so one of those two. Probably Michael Jackson, because I did eventually see Madonna. I never did get to see Michael Jackson. So, I mean, I think I grew up with Thriller and, that album and just watching MTV. So I think that would have been an iconic show to go to. I think the other one, maybe Prince. I think Prince would have been fantastic to see. I recently went to a birthday party, and it was a Prince-themed birthday party, so everybody had to dress up in different eras of Prince. And that made me think, God, I really wish I had seen Prince in concert. That would have been an amazing show. So I know I've picked all like deceased people, but I think that just makes it, more like final, that you'll never get to see that performer in concert ever again. So sorry to be such a downer here to finish off your podcast. Those would be my two votes, and then Madonna maybe like 1A, B, and C.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you for jumping on, and thank you for being the first guest for the fourth quarter. And hopefully we win some games this year, much more than last year. So go Texans.
Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure and happy to jump on.
Thank you again.
Have a good one.
You not really in touch if you not tuning in. This is Crenshaw, Briggs, and VT. We want the touchdown. We not trying to go for 3. And it's best if you get up out the street, cause them bulls out the pen and they bout to stampede.